Kia ora tātou, and good morning everyone, and welcome. Councillors and members of the press and staff, of course, to the last meeting of this triennium of the Regional Council. I would ask Councillor Scott to please take us through the prayer. So I have one apology for today. Councillor Bevan is away, so I'm happy to move that apology be accepted. Thank you, Councillor Barker. Second that. Thank you, Councillor Pipe. Put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Notices. I have one notice. Dr. Pearce is at a family funeral today, well, I'm hopeful that both.
Mr. Scotland and Mr. Robinson will be attending.
Will be attending, okay, thank you. Any other notices for today? There being none. Conflict of interest declarations. There being none. Confirmation of the minutes held on the 31st of August. For accuracy. Page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, page 15 and page 16, 17, 18, 19, page 20, page 21, page 22, 23 and 24. Someone happy to move? They are a true and correct record. Thank you, Councillor Scott. Second, and thank you, Councillor Dick. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Now, there was a brief minute of an extraordinary council meeting on the 8th. Pretty self-explanatory. Hopefully everyone's got a copy of that. You haven't seen a copy of that?
Not that I can recall. What's it say?
That was the chief executive discussion, the public part of it.
Oh, yeah, I've got it here.
We'll just wish to have a quick look at that. Councillor Dick, has everyone got a copy of that?
No.
I'm prepared to move.
You're happy to move? Thank you. Discussion. Put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Matters arising. There being none in the public session, move on to follow-up items. Hand that over to the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think all of the 5 follow-up items are self-explanatory, or at least there's the status comment explains where the action has been taken, and we're happy to answer any questions on that.
Any questions on follow-up items? Councillor Belford.
Discussion of the Labuema request?
Yes, it does.
Then I would like to raise an issue. I have sent to all councillors a response to an Information Act request that is noted in the agenda papers here. And if you haven't seen it, I would suggest you take a look at it because it does raise issues that I think affect all councillors, not just councillors in this term, in this setting, but all councillors going forward in terms of the nature of what has been asked and whether it is would ultimately be found to be a legitimate request or not. But as I indicated here, this kind of basically fishing expedition, if you will, is something that any councillor could be subjected to. I noted here that I made a request of my own to underscore the point of what a request like this leads to. And clock, of course, is ticking on that.
Do you have any questions on it, or?
My question here is I would like to get some further advice through the council as to what the proper resolution of this ought to be.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have formally advised the Central Hawke's Bay District Council of the response that's been received to their information request. No further action has been forthcoming from then. I only advised them yesterday. I was a day late. But they do have the opportunity, if they so wish, to go to the Ombudsman and say that the Regional Council has failed to respond to their request. Presumably then the Ombudsman would ask us why we haven't responded, and we would have to provide them with your email, and then it would be up to them to determine what action they would take from there. But that's a general process. If someone is not happy with the response that's been given from the authority, in this case us, they have every right to go to the Ombudsman.
And so that same resolution would apply to my request when the clock runs on it.
It would depend on whether or not you're
I would
satisfied with
expect,
the reply.
Well, for example, I would expect the next meeting agenda would list my request as an Official Information Act request.
Yes,
the
it will.
clock is running, 20 working days on it.
Yes.
And the same process would be followed with respect to that request.
Well, if you're not satisfied with the response, then you are, as any person is entitled to do, and seek further advice from the Ombudsman.
Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you. Microphone. My voice generally carries, but I'll do the microphone thing. I see on the Lagoima requests that we have requests by 3 media outlets: Radio New Zealand, Dominion Post and Hawke's Bay Today. Just, do we treat all media requests as a Lagoima request and take it as some sort of, through a bureaucratic process, which it is?
No, we don't.
Or do we have a process whereby we answer them immediately? And if we answer them immediately, why are these 3 here on the Lagoima request?
If they've officially written to us or contacted us saying that they are under Lagoima and they have referred to Lagoima, they're listed here. If they're not, if it's generally we try our best to provide the media with information as soon as practical after they've requested it, because we're aware that it's often a current or topical issue. So there will be, for this type of request, there'll probably be 100 others that have come into the building from them that have been responded to as quickly as possible.
Well, that's what I would have thought. So the defining characteristic of these is they've said under Lagoima, so you treat them as a Lagoima request. All other requests are answered as promptly as possible.
All other requests actually are, strictly speaking, any request for information that comes into the council, whether it be verbal at the reception desk or through a more formal process, is actually subject to the Local Government Official Information Act. But for the purposes of where there's a specific, if someone has specifically said it's a Lagoima request, it's been registered, or if there's a significant amount of information that may be required, that's also registered, because then we can, if someone else in the future asks also for that information, we can scroll through and say, we've answered that, here's the answer. So it's more efficient.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Scott?
Just around the request for information on councillors, we've all known that we are subject to Lagoima, but do I understand that the only reason that Councillor Belford has served that Lagoima request on another councillor is purely to serve a point? In other words, it's malicious. And are other councillors under threat of attack? In which case, Mr Chairman, I think the sooner that is public knowledge, the better.
Thank you, yeah.
Is it?
We're
there's
not having a
just-
tit for tat here. Look, that has entered a process and that will go through a process. Well,
I think that's it. Malicious is a word that's designed to attack the integrity of Councillor Balfour.
well then
I
withdraw,
personally think it should be withdrawn.
order, withdraw the word malicious.
Unjustified. It
You'll
is
replace
for
malicious
no,
with
for
unjustified.
no good reason. He
Okay.
has made it clear that it's merely a reason to prove a point.
Okay, well, that is
is not
it will,
justified reason.
Order, councillor, it will go through the process, right? We've established that, so. Any other questions? Someone happy to move? Thank you, Councillor Barker, very helpful as always. Seconder for that? Councillor Scott, thank you. Further discussion, I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Minor items, not on the agenda. RMLA from me. Sorry, Councillor Belford.
Feedlots.
Yep. Mr. Moore.
Impact.
Beauty. Yeah, Rocket Lab.
Mr. Chairman.
That's me again. Thank you, Chief Executive. And Councillor Dick.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, given it's the last meeting, is it appropriate in open to ask for an update on the status of the East Coast Rail project?
East Coast Rail, yeah, we'll do a bit of homework throughout the day and come back on that. Dick, Rail, thank you. Anything else? Councillor Barker.
Oh, I just want to add to the list about feedlots, because the last meeting I raised the issue, and I asked for some information to be provided for us about the RMA, etc., and I haven't seen it yet.
Feedlots plus RMA, yeah.
Councillor Bounsfield covers off the stuff I won't speak.
Sure, okay. Good, complete set of minor items, thank you. Right, let's now get into the body of the meeting. Affixing the common seal, and I'll hand it over to Mr. Drury, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Leasehold was 3 sheets last meeting. Now it's only 5 items, so which is good. 2 transfers and 3 sales. So they are starting to taper off, perhaps. Apart from that, we have staff warrants and a memorandum of agreement with, I note, a map which to give the location which council have asked for previously.
Any questions? Someone happy to move then? Councillor Barker, thank you. We have a seconder. Councillor Scott. Put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Right. Investigation and inquiry into Havelock North water contamination event. And I'll hand it over to the team, or the Chief Executive to start with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, we've had a discussion among the team and determined that the least sick of us is James Palmer, so he's going to be doing this particular item. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Chairman. As councillors will recall, on Friday the 12th of August of this year, the community was notified in a range of different ways by the Hawke's Bay District Health Board and the Hastings District Council of a contamination of the Havelock North water supply. Since that time, an extensive body of work has been undertaken by Regional Council staff to assist both Hastings District Council and the DHB in understanding the cause of this event, and since the 25th of August we've also been undertaking our own inquiry under the Resource Management Act with respect to the consents for the Brookvale bores. That body of work has involved a considerable volume of staff time, and on page 20 of your papers that is detailed, and the total at the time of writing the total expenditure of internal time amounted to 147,000. We've estimated to the end of the investigation, although this is an estimate, I must add, given that there are contingent factors in the investigation that are unfolding on a daily basis, but we're estimating that the total internal cost of the investigation will be 176,000, with a further 200,000 or 201,000 of external costs. Those costs are proposed to be met through 177,000 of staff time, which is already budgeted for, and it's essentially a displacement on existing work programs. And then the further 201,000 for external costs to be met through reprioritising expenditure within current budget allocations and using the favourable operating surplus from year end from the 2015-2016 year. The second part to the work that lies ahead, as well as concluding our own investigation, is participating in the government inquiry. At this point in time, it's not possible to estimate precisely what that inquiry is going to mean and involve with respect to Regional Council staff and participation. The chair of the inquiry team is presently on leave and doesn't return to the country until the middle of October. We expect to have the inquiry commencing its engagement with the Hawke's Bay community towards the end of October, at which time we might get some expectations laid out in terms of the hearings timetables, the style of inquisition they wish to undertake, the extent to which they're going to want to meet with and cross-examine council staff, and whether they have further information requests other than those that we have already anticipated. As all that comes together, we'll build a clearer picture as to the likely commitment that the inquiry will require. At the outset, we expect that the commitment will be reasonably substantial in terms of staff time, and will involve extensive legal review of the legal responsibilities of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and the way in which the council has discharged those responsibilities. Therefore, ongoing external legal advice through the inquiry is anticipated. So given that uncertainty and given the fact that that is going to get underway before the end of October, and we as a council need to be proactive in the view of the executive in our participation and in our provision of information to the inquiry, we are seeking your approval today to draw upon the Regional Disaster Reserve to assist in funding those costs which can't otherwise be met through the reprioritisation and the use of the surplus expenditure at the end of last year. The Regional Disaster Reserve does have within its criteria for drawdown the costs of responding to and managing an event. This is clearly an event which could not have been anticipated by council staff in our budgeting and planning for the year. The costs, as you have seen, are significant and substantial and could not therefore be easily absorbed on an ongoing basis over the coming 6 months, during which the inquiry will be undertaking its work within our normal contingencies. Therefore, in our view, the Regional Disaster Reserve is the most appropriate place to go with respect to meeting those costs. And I would just also note that some of the costs, particularly with respect to the direct investigation, may be recoverable from one or more parties in the event that a successful prosecution is undertaken. But at this point in time, there is no view being taken as to whether or not there will be a prosecution, and that's something we would need to come back to Council on. So it's our intention to report back to the Council on a monthly basis during the inquiry and give an ongoing update as to the level of expectation of participation that is set by the inquiry itself, and the costs and resourcing implications of that to Council. So we would come back month by month over the next 6 months and continue to update on that. So I don't know, Paul, have you got anything to add? Or, gents?
I think Mr. Palmer's put it very eloquently. We should employ him in finance, I think. There will be some questions. Councillor Barker, with your microphone, please.
Microphone, yes. I see that we're going to have 2 hours of student time at $96 actual, it says is the way I read it. Is that correct? Students cost $48 an hour. I'm sure they'll be delighted.
It's a charge-out rate. Covers the use of equipment, seat, power, etc., etc. We certainly don't pay them that.
Thank you. On the external laboratory testing, could you give some particularities as to why it's $108,000? The second question I have on that thing is the number 2 consultancy. I'd like some details as to why and why we're going to spend $15,000 on consultants when we've got our own staff, what they would do and what they would add, and how you've come to the number. And the third question is legal fees. I'd like you to give me some description of why the justification for the $20,000 in legal fees.
So if I do them in order, the consultancy, if you look at note 2 and below the table, it allows for us to have epidemiologists from Massey University assist us in the inquiry, so we understand pathways by which these contaminants move and how they survive and operate in groundwater, so that's important for our investigation. That's epidemiology. 108,000 is a higher end estimate of costs, given that at the point that we were pulling together the table, we didn't have all of the costs available to us because the sampling takes quite some time, or the lab processing takes some time. We didn't have all those costs. It also includes provision for the use of labs for dye testing. So at the moment we're trying to use a fluorimeter for dye testing, but in the unlikely but possible scenario of the fluorimeter not working, we're going to have to send all of those samples to a lab for testing. So we've made provision for that. And the final one is legal fees. That's engaging, and again in note 4 at the bottom, Jonathan Krebs, who's a local barrister who takes or provides legal services for us in the event of any enforcement action. So that's on the basis that there is a subsequent enforcement action taken. So it may not be in there in the end.
Well, thank you, because it doesn't seem to be complete to me, because I do understand the council's employed May Chen.
Well,
Yeah.
So Jonathan.
So she doesn't do work pro bono. So where are the costs of those being allocated?
Yeah. So just to be clear, this table is in the 377,000 is the cost for our investigation around well integrity. It's not the cost for the overall inquiry. So there are 2 components. One's the investigation of the well integrity, the District Council bores, and the other is the government-led inquiry, which is a further cost.
So when are we going to get details of both so we can see the total financial picture? Because it seems to me that you've shown us part of it here, not the complete.
That's correct, Councillor, and that's on the basis that the cost of the inquiry remain a highly uncertain variable at this point in time. The costs of incurring Chen Palmer Associates advice relates to the inquiry. It's the government inquiry as opposed to our own investigation, and that's the matter that we will come back on some further detail with once we have heard from the inquiry itself as to their expected work program, their expectations of ourselves.
Well, I would, just to say to you, I would have thought that that reference should have been in the report to give councillors a complete picture, because this, if you read this, it gives the implication it is a complete picture, but it's not. So I just felt the report fell short.
Councillor Pipe.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just picking up on something that Councillor Barker said with regards to our staff and their involvement in the investigation. In paragraph 21, you talk about the negative impact on the delivery of planned programs budgeted for in the 2016-2017 year. Can you give us an indication of where that negative impact may be felt?
So I can start and the team can chip in, but the most likely negative impact will be in our science programs, given that there's been a significant draw on science staff in this today. We're working hard to manage that, to avoid that occurring. So at this stage, we're not seeing that happening, but it is possible. Particularly, we're focused on ensuring that our big projects carry on and are delivered unimpeded to support the tank policy program, for example. And where required, we will bring in external consultants to assist, as we have done in areas where we don't have the expertise. So we're working hard to avoid it. I don't see it being a major issue because we've tried to, if you like, limit the number of people who are involved in the investigation, so we haven't spread it out throughout the whole team so it's impacting everybody. It sits largely with the groundwater team and Stephen Swaby as science manager at this point.
Possibly just from the planning side, so we have proposed reprioritising $50,000 from the consultancy budget from planning. The likely impact of that is on our freshwater reform work, and the bulk of that budget is currently prioritised towards the tank work program, and so we've got a sort of a twin dependency here with the science team, and there's a risk that we won't be able to provide all of the external advice to the tank process by the end of this current financial year that we had planned. And what that will simply mean is that we'll have to push that work into the next financial year, and it may result in some delay to bring the tank plan change forward, although I'm optimistic at this point in time that we'll find a way through that.
So let me get it clear. It's a tank program, one of the programs that's going to be held up and delayed. What are the other programs? You mentioned something else here. What are the other programs, major projects?
Well, the only other potential is that we may end up with some delays in some of our routine groundwater programs. So some of the samples that might have been taken this month are delayed into the following month, sort of thing. But like I say, we've tried to limit the impact as best as we can to avoid that occurring. And actually, I should point out, of course, that obviously there's a significant draw on the resource use team, the compliance team. Pretty much all of them, bar a couple, are involved. So there is potential that some of our routine compliance monitoring may be impacted by this because of the necessity of dealing with this.
And perhaps I just would like to add on behalf of the staff that have been involved in this, of the 1,500 hours of staff time that's been devoted to the investigation to date, a large proportion of that has been done after hours, evenings, weekends and what have you. So council staff have pulled out all stops to advance the work around the investigation, and in many cases have been trying to keep their day job going at the same time.
Very good. Councillor Scott, then Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my question is, have we got enough money in there? Given that the GNS report highlighted 3 bores with young water in, are the other 2 bores being investigated too for integrity? And I understand from previous reports that all consent holders with water takes from the groundwater have been notified of their obligation not to allow contamination from surface water to groundwater. What are we doing about monitoring and checking the integrity of all of those wells?
So just to be clear, bores 1 and 2 are part of the investigation around integrity, not bore 3. And yes, we've put out a range of communications reminding bore permit holders of their obligations to manage and protect well integrity. And invariably, what are we going to do is the process that will come out of the government-led inquiry. Because like many councils throughout New Zealand, that's not something that's done routinely. There are thousands of bores throughout Hawke's Bay in New Zealand, so it poses a question of what's appropriate moving forward.
Given the wording in Plan Change 5 about allowing no degradation of the aquifer, and this seems to be the greatest threat of degradation, is actually lack of integrity of wells, is this going to put quite a lot of pressure on us in the future to make sure that we are delivering?
Well, I mean, I guess what I'd be saying is that our regulatory response to this is one of state of the environment monitoring. So you just received at the last Regional Planning Committee meeting an update on groundwater quality for the region, which shows that groundwater quality is good. And we typically use, if you like, a dashboard approach that where we see the resources in good condition and behaving as we would expect, there's no requirement for further detailed investigations. Where we see there are issues, state and trends show conditions poor and getting worse, we would go and investigate and find out why. And a good example of that is the Karamu stream, where it's in poor condition and getting worse. It was part of the science investigations to support the tank process. There was a specific study to understand why, what were the drivers, and then it allows you to go in and create policy or revise policy to deal with those things, which is exactly what's happening now through the tank process. But look, all of those issues, and they're the right questions, are the ones that will be traversed through the government inquiry, I have no doubt. What the final outcome is, I wouldn't want to hazard a guess.
Thank you. Councillor Belford.
Yes, I have one question about our investigation, one about the legal representation. Regarding our investigation, when we talk about a successful prosecution, could you just walk us through what, if the target of a successful prosecution is a council, what kind of remedies are at hand? What kind of penalties are generically, what's the situation?
Well, the maximum penalty under the Resource Management Act is a term of imprisonment or an up to $600,000 fine. But the final penalties are at the discretion of the court to determine.
Is that for all the councillors?
What we would be seeking to do is, if we took a prosecution, we would anticipate there would be some form of penalty imposed, and we would also be seeking to recover our costs. So we would ask the court, we would make submissions around our costs, and then ask the court to provide those, some or all of those costs be returned to us by the party whom we are prosecuting.
Offhand, do you know of any instance where there's been a prosecution of a council by a council, and what kind of penalties have been applied to the
not off the top
defendant
of my head.
Council?
Not off the top of my head, and it's really a time, place, circumstance thing. I mean, it'll reflect the scale and significance of the offending and the costs of us. So there's a range of variables that make it difficult to kind of provide a formula. And look, I don't know off the top of my head. I can't give you an example, so I don't know whether anybody else can.
There have been a number of prosecutions of councils by another council, or even in some instances a council by itself, a prosecution of itself. So there's certain...
Who was the first prosecuting Napier?
Beg your pardon?
Who was the first prosecuting Napier Council?
Prosecuting, but legal.
No.
Legal action against them?
Legal action, but
Yeah,
not a prosecution.
there wasn't a prosecution under the RMA. So under the RMA, there are certainly have been some previous cases, and there is, but none of us, I think, will honestly say that we're familiar with what the consequence of those prosecutions were.
So my other question has to do with the legal representation. We have $20,000 in here as a contingency for Mr. Krebs and our investigation, and then an unknown amount for Chen Palmer. My worry is what overlap, if we wind up investing up to $20,000 in legal assistance to Mr. Krebs, who will be at that point, one would think, fully on top of all the relevant issues associated with this matter. Why would we then kind of duplicate the effort? Why wouldn't we just carry him through to do the other work as well? It seems like we'd be kind of encouraging overlap here. And in the briefing we did get, there was quite a bit of discussion by Chen Palmer of investigation-related matters. So it seems already there's a mixture of what's advice we're getting here.
Sure. So, and a good question. And the reality is that there is a little bit of overlap, but we're managing that carefully to ensure that we have a clear demarcation between legal representation on the inquiry versus the investigation. So, Jonathan's focus is purely on our investigation of well integrity. He's not minded to consider the consenting environment, our planning environment, the Health Act, all of the other legislative matters that will fall before the government-led inquiry that they will traverse and will consider, our relationship to. His focus is purely going to be on working with us around case reviews, evidence collection and preparation, submission for the court around a prosecution. And I'd just make the point that it is a relatively low figure simply because we have good competency in the staff in this stuff anyway. So there's a lot of legwork is done by the staff in preparation for prosecutions, which means there's a lower level of time required by legal counsel in terms of doing the work. His time is also likely to cover court time, where he's making our representations and submissions before the court, as well as potentially reviewing sentences and those sorts of things and deciding on appeals if we saw fit. So there is a little bit of overlap, but we're carefully managing the two and obviously ensuring that the respective counsel are appropriately communicating with each other so that one knows what the other's doing to avoid both of them doing the same thing.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thanks, Chair. It would appear that it's not prudent to be dipping into our contingency reserve during the annual plan process, and this we've been shown up with that weakness here today. So my question to you, Liz, I'm really concerned that we are delaying the tank investigations in this process. We have got Nahiwi in the media saying that it's all about water, that's the most important issue for him. So what is the likelihood of being able to wind back that $300,000 that we've committed there to Matatini back to 250, and if so, what's the process?
Look, first of all,
take the money back out of the contingency fund, put it back in the contingency fund.
You've actually approved 200,000 to Te Matatini, not 300. They had asked for 300, but it was 200, and that's made up of about 3 different pots of money. In fact, I've already received the invoice, so it's highly unlikely you can wind that back in terms of that. But I think as a more general point, Councillor, the issue around the impact of this, and it could have been another major event. It could have been, heaven forbid, an earthquake or something like that that would have severely diverted resources and have an impact on our ongoing work program. So I think, as Mr Palmer has already indicated, we'll get a much clearer view from the inquiry team over the next few weeks about their timing, their requirements of us, etc. We'll be able to sit back, have a look, bring back to Council a better assessment of costs around the inquiry, because we'll have a better idea of what's time will be required. And also I think we'll then have a chance to have looked at the ongoing implications for work program timing, particularly around tank, and we may come back to this to you for additional resources to catch up, if you like, on that timetable, if that is a priority for Council. So I think this is an initial presentation to you, but I think we will undertake to report regularly to you on the ongoing costs, the ongoing work implications of this particular piece of work for the rest of our work program.
Thank you. I had a question to Mr Drury about the Regional Disaster Reserve. How we like to cap it at $3.5 million. I mean, how often, how are we funding that in broad terms? I know you talk about it there. But
Yeah, the fund is a series of investments. 70% of that sum is in a local body central government bonds. 30% are in equities. And at the end of the 30th of June, that fund was $3.5 million. There's no additional sums put into the money, into the fund. It earns interest on that fund. You'll note there that I've indicated that the policy for council is to have that fund between 2.7 and 3.7, so there is a little bit of flexibility there. In fact, there's probably 500 or 600,000 flexibility on that fund before it even hits the minimum.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Question around that fund, Mr Chairman. Given that this will drop that fund by a reasonable amount, will there be some moves in the next plan to actually replenish that through ratepayer money?
No, it's not proposed to do that.
So it will remain low and at risk? Because our costs of disaster are only going to go up and up and up. We haven't reviewed the level of that regional disaster fund for many years. That 2.75 to 3.75 has stayed like that for a long time. Is that realistic in today's terms of costs?
The minimum of 2.75 was geared to 2 events and paying being able to be in a position to afford the policy excess for those 2 events, and the policy excess is 1.5 million. So if you have 2 events, that's approximately 3 million, and the minimum is 2.75. So we're what's the chance of having 2 events? Well, yeah.
So just to follow up on that, that hasn't changed. The excess has been constant for some time.
Well, it was put to council, I think, about 12 months ago.
Long-term plan.
Yeah, it was a paper that Mr. Adey put up on dealing with disaster and the funding of those disasters, and that was one of the recommendations, was the level of these funds. From recollection, I thought it had moved up a bit. Yeah.
That, Mr Chairman, it's all very well to cover the excess, but we've got some assets that are uninsurable.
Yes, we have, like cycleways, for instance, on top of the stop banks. But most of our assets are insured.
Okay, no further questions. Councillor Graham, you wish to move? Seconder for that. Thank you. Councillor Scott, you wish to speak?
I do. I think it's, firstly, it's most appropriate that we use to fund part of this, at least, from the disaster fund. This was a disaster, no different from a tsunami or an earthquake or anything else. So I'm very happy that part of the funding is coming from that. Secondly, I just want to comment on Mr Palmer's comments around staff, and I saw that also, staff working in the weekends and an extra time to cope with the situation in the field. And I think it needs to be said that our team did a phenomenal job in the field and beyond the call of duty. Everything they could do, they did. So that needs to be said and acknowledged. So I very strongly support that. I do worry about some of the costs here. I shouldn't say this, but my lawyer doesn't cough for $20,000. So I'm pleased you've got a particularly good deal there. And I do think we possibly going to get a bit of an overrun, so we need to watch that carefully. But I also support Councillor Barker's position, because I looked at this and I thought this is not all the costs that are related to this, and certainly there might be in a different section, but I would like to have an understanding of all of our costs that relate to this particular incident, and that would include any legal cost or planned legal costs, certainly some of them already paid, that we anticipate. So I wouldn't mind a figure of where you think that's going to go to, because that could be a lot higher than a lot of this. So our total cost could be quite high here.
Seconder.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and thank you for this paper, which does outline the cost that is incurred in such a case like this. It is surprisingly, it's a very detailed process, and obviously it is going to be a high cost. So, but what does worry me is that we are trying to manage it within existing budgets as much as possible, and I hate to think of anything that's going to slow the tank process. The tank process absolutely stalled because of all the amount of extra resources that went into the Ruataniwha. And that had a huge cost on that stakeholder community. And I'd hate to see anything else now that trips a process that has back on track, has momentum, and I think that momentum must be maintained. Otherwise, they're going to lose faith that every time there's a hiccup, they're the ones that go on the back burner. So I'd really beg the staff not to. If it means bringing in extra resources from outside, then it has to be. But please don't do it at the expense of Tank, because that's already suffered, and I don't believe it should stall again. So with those comments, Mr Chair, I support the paper.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr Chair, could I just add that we've already been through one disaster here of uninsurable assets that cost us $8 million, and that's why I am concerned about the contingency fund. We know that those live edge protection is actually uninsurable.
Good point. Councillor Barker.
I'd like to move an amendment. My amendment reads, a new 4. Council is to be provided with monthly updates on all invoices received and all other external costs for both the investigation and the inquiry, as well as updated internal costs. I want to do that because I
know you want to do it, and I've worked that out. I need a seconder that hasn't spoken. Councillor Balfour, thank you. Councillor Barker.
The reason for this is that I think this council has to have clear oversight of where these costs are tracking to, for all the reasons that have been outlined by previous speakers. I just have every expectation, my experience of these things is that they will run well beyond the cost we have. And if we don't have, if councils aren't aware of that, then we're in a position where we cannot make informed decisions. And I accept the proposition put by other councillors that we have reduced work and effort on Tank because of other activities. And this, in my view, is not, is in reality the council underfunding its activities. So if we're going to keep everything running at the same time, we're going to have to fund them, and we're going to think seriously about them. And we can't borrow off Peter to pay Paul all the time and expect Peter to continue to run at the same pace as they were before. So, and if you're going to have, if councils are going to have confidence about this, they need to see the facts themselves. So I think all those external costs need to come here. We need to see what they are. If lawyers go to invoices and external consultants go to invoices, we need to see them. I want to see them for both elements of it. I also want to see how the costs are running internally so we can ask sensible questions about what this is doing to other parts of our activity. And if we have that, then we're going to be in a position to have the confidence to make some tough decisions, because I cannot see this being anything other than a significant overrun. So that's just my point on that. And I'd like to also finally close by echoing the point of Councillor Graham. I thought the presentations the staff made on the Campylobacter outbreak in Havelock North were fabulous. Calm, assured, measured, confidence-inspiring. I thought the staff were excellent, and a credit to this organisation. Thank you.
Thank you, seconder. Nothing to add. Anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Councillor Dick.
A worthwhile amendment, and I'd support it, but I think it's a little incomplete. If we're just going to find out the sum of invoices received, I think it would have more sense if you put in there updates on invoices received and anticipated.
Yes, accept.
2 words addition of second. Are you happy with that? Yeah, okay. You wish to speak further, Councillor Dick?
Oh, no. For all the reasons outlined by Councillor Barker, it's prudent, worth doing for the council to have the oversight that it should have, and I don't see it's going to pose any great problems for staff.
No further speakers. You wish to sum up? Put the amendment. All those in favour, please say aye. And against? That's carried, and that now becomes a substantive motion. Anyone else wish to speak? Further speakers wish to sum up? No. Okay, I'll put put the substantive motion now. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Thank you.